Welcome back, guys. I got my canvas set up. Last week we went over canvases. First week we covered gesso, so that's what I did here. You can see I did a quick placement sketch underneath. I've lost a lot of the detail, so today I'm going to go in with some charcoal pencils and eraser, and we're going to construct the head from the ground up. So if you have your photo reference chosen or mirror set up to your easel, perfect. We're going to apply everything we've learned so far. We're going to go over kind of what I did last week was just compose this on the page. You saw that in that video. So we went over our composure. We're going to reinstate some of the linear qualities that we covered that first week, looking at the major and minor forms of the portrait features. And then we'll apply a reductive process to get the nice value breakup, but keeping it simple like those thumbnails. So everything comes together this week. Like I said, I applied gesso over this to kind of mimic that digital mock-up I did last week. And so now we're going to go over the construction method. So if you have charcoal at home or graphite, that works great. Just to make sure you have a nice big piece of paper. Great thing about paper is it can be cropped down later. I did this placement sketch so I know where I want it to be on the canvas. And then we're just going to start from the ground up. I'd start with a harder pencil, or something forgiving like some willow charcoal that can be applied and then just brushed away, leaving a great room for error. So remember, biggest forms first. Biggest form on your portrait is going to be your cranium. And I'm going to look for that big mass of the head. Now when I put this in, I was basically just going for, I wanted the head to be on this part of the canvas before I gessoed over it. So now I need to kind of break this up in some nice discernible planes, which then I can add charcoal or paint onto and then start to pull out. So remember, and here I can see kind of my hair coming up here in my reference. That's the ball. Now remember, if you have any turn in the portrait, off-center turn, to 3/4 to profile, you're going to see the side plane of the head. And then it's important to have your center line. And then we want to add in that secondary large structure of any head is the jawbone or the mandible. That's the other moving major bony part. And you see, aside from that cranium, I'm kind of moving into straight lines. Straight lines are a lot easier for us to grasp. Then we can get a little bit more accurate, maybe breaking down into minor, smaller straights until we have enough straights that it curves out. Okay, so we got the large cranium on there. We've added the jaw to the front. Let's reinstate that center line. That'll ensure that we have symmetry. The nice thing about willow is that we can just pull out any excess. Okay, now in my reference, I can't really see the back of my head, but I'm trying to envision it. And then that side plane often cuts through that temple bone right there, and that's going to be another big break. Remember, from that side plane, we can get our proportions, our thirds. So we have where the hairline is usually, a third down to that brow ridge, third to the bottom of where the nose connects to the face, and then to the bottom of the chin. Okay, so that feels about right. Start with those thirds, look back at your photo reference, see where you or the model differs from those thirds and apply them. But this will at least make it look humanoid. Okay, so we constructed with our big masses, cranium, the jawbone, adding that side plane, and then looking for the proportions. Looks good. Remember, third, and then for the separation of the lips, it's another third down. Now we can start looking at the minor forms, or the secondary forms of the head. start thinking about the eye sockets. So those brow ridges are the tops of the eye sockets. Again, I'm just starting with some straights. This gave us the proportion, but now we can get a little bit more specific with it. And I'm using that concept that we practiced in the thumbnails, just simple two-value here, looking for the light and the dark. If you're confused at all, if the halftones start to get a little bit confusing, squint down. Squint, squint, squint to simplify. Okay, so we're adding those eye sockets in, creating a nice structure to the face. Before we get into any of the, where the eyelids are, where the pupils are, first we need to know where the eye sockets are, okay? Creating that nice depth, the relief to the face. And then the nose, or if you can establish where maybe the tear duct would be, you can come down, think of the volume of the face. Not everything is on a flat plane, so I'm kind of thinking about it coming down off of rolling around the cheek right there, the maxilla, and giving us that connection or the curve of that wing to the face. Okay, now I'm going to switch from, this is kind of forgiving and makes for easy kind of reduction when we come in here and pull out, the lights of the eyelids and stuff, but I'm going to switch to a pencil so we can get a little bit more detail and a little bit more control for when we put in this nose here. Now the center line cuts through the nose, but it doesn't give us the edge of the nose. It kind of gives us the placement of the glabella right here, that keystone shape, which falls into a little bit of shadow. But we want to erase out that center line and then look for the top plane. So we're not looking for the triangle of the nose. Remember, we're trying to think about the major planes. So we have like the side plane of the head, the front plane of the head. And the same thing with the nose. We have the side plane with a maxilla bone. I see it kind of comes in through here. And then we have the front, or the top of the front plane. And remember when I was choosing this reference, I didn't love how we had this tangency right here. I want to avoid that tangent. So this is where we can start designing a little bit, taking our reference and then making modifications to it, but like chosen modifications to beautify it. And so I'm going to bump out this cheek a little bit. Not trying, I don't want to destroy my likeness. I don't want to get rid of that, but I'm going to bring in the tip of the nose just a little so that it's not the exact same line. That'll push the cheek back. It'll pull the nose forward. It doesn't have to be a huge separation, just a little bit. Okay, so we have this side plane, we have the top plane. Same thing when we found the proportion of the brow ridge there. That was just to help give us the top. Now we can pull out that, squinting down, looking for the light and shadow. And this is where, we have a lot of things going on, juggling a lot. So that's why having that one direct light source. I know my reference has the kind of diffused daylight of the forest coming in, but if you spotlight yourself or you have a strong single light source, that's going to make all this so much easier to discern. So there'll be a lot less squinting. So I knew going forward that I was going to have to kind of push the depth and the separation of light and dark because it was a slightly diffused light source. And I knew I was going to have to run into that. So hopefully you chose more of a direct light and it's going to be easier to capture and find these lights and darks. But by pushing this darkness, we get a nice sense of depth there and structure. Okay, so same thing. We have the top plane, side plane. Let's look for the bottom plane of the nose. Remember, it's just not a triangle. It's a thing with structure. Arguably, one of the biggest it protrudes from the face the most these might recede, this might protrude the most. So we really want to push the plane changes. Now, if we want to get down into the minors, since I did say I want to take this to a higher level of detail since I'm using charcoal, we want to think about just a little bit of anatomy here, looking back to what we covered earlier in the semester when we went over the features and their anatomy. We want to think about the nasal bone here, so the skull, a hard bony surface, turning into the lateral cartilage. So on me, it's actually, you can see there's a bump there, so that's where that lateral cartilage inserts or connects to the nasal bone, and then, so it bumps up, and then it cuts in to the greater alar cartilage of the ball of the nose, and so we get that dip right there. So we're just trying to make sense of all of these little subtle bumps, instead of just doing a triangle straight line kind of thing, right? We're trying to get a little bit more specific. And then the ball of the nose has its top plane and either its front or bottom plane. So I'm just squinting down, looking for the value change to help make sense of all this. And it wraps down here. And I'm not going to look at the nostril yet. I'm going to look at the forms that create that nostril. I'm going to look at the wing of the nose, I'm going to look at the ball of the nose, or the greater alar cartilage, and how that turns into the septum down here, and then how the wing wraps around this way. And this is where it connects, so that's that third. And for now, I'm going to just jump back to my, you could use a little bit softer pencil, I'm going to use the vine charcoal, and just merge that shadow shape. So see, we've got that, if you watch any of the drawing videos, that note and structure, the light and dark. Not getting into the deep darks of the nostril quite yet. Okay, so that's starting to look a lot better, even better than my placement sketch I had on there. You'll notice this line is a construction line. It'll disappear once we get into actual toning or like the reductive painting process. That's just to help me discern the separation of top plane, side plane, much like the center line will disappear. Okay. Now, so we did the eyes, look for the brow ridge, look for the tear duct leading down to the connection point behind the wing. Thought about the ball, lateral cartilage, connecting to the nasal bone. We're going to skip that for now. We're just going for the big statements. Then we can dive into smaller structure, maybe the eyelids, the structure of the eye. But let's first finish out this mouth. That connection point there also gives us that smile line, which we were looking at earlier, which is that orbicularis oris. Same thing with when we place this here, thinking about that roundness of the cheekbone. We don't just want to draw, let me grab a piece of paper actually. I can have a what not to do. You know, we don't want to just draw a straight line across for the mouth. We want to think about the tooth cylinder, how it's wrapping around from the bottom connection point of the nose all the way to the chin. And we also want to think about how it's wrapping around this way, around all those teeth in there. Okay? And that's going to, the linear construction of that's going to give it some depth, and then on top of that, the value structure will bump it up even further. So when I come down here, curving that center line, seeing how that separation of the lips comes down, but then wraps like so. And remember the nose, okay, let's get into a little bit of the anatomy of the mouth here. We have got the top lips and bottom lips made up of the tubercles, and we want to think about those as 5 separate pillows. All right, 2 on the bottom, 3 on the top. So that first one you can see right there, and then it's cut into by the philtrum, which is kind of a concave, or the lack of the volumes on either side, but it's being enhanced by my mustache. And then the other two overlaps. This one you can't see, it's behind. It's being overlapped by that center tubercle, and then this one right here, and they all kind of reach down into the node, right? And all of these muscles kind of have these connection points at the nodes. Same thing with the philtrum. There's a concavity down here created by these two pillars of muscles, enhanced by the darkness of the hair a little bit even more. And same how we applied the noten, light, dark, light, dark. We want to think about the stair-step effect of that on the lips, noting how, yes, this falls into darkness because of kind of the shadow being cast on it, but then the upper lip, let's look at like a silhouette of that. We have the nose, shadow plane, light plane. We have the top of the muzzle, and then that top lip falls into shadow. The bottom lip's a little bit bigger. It comes out, it catches a little bit of light, and then it falls down into that concavity right there. So we want to go light, shadow, light, shadow, light, shadow. So let's emphasize that right now. So we found kind of the linear construction. Just throw this into shadow to push it back. Same thing right here. And then this is the chin, and it kind of bumps out and catches light. Let me address this really quick. We push this cheek out. The cheek is coming in, and then the chin is pushing out a little bit. Again, kind of enhanced slightly by just the hair down there. So I guess my point there is this falls into shadow. This is light. I'm going to add a subtle tone to it just because the local color of the hair darkens a little bit, but in general, it's a light shape. It's coming out at us, catching light. Wraps back here to a node we can't see. And then this bottom lip pushes out and gets pretty close to that chin line and cheek. I'm sorry, cheek line and chin. Okay, so that's the structure. Now we can kind of look at the details, some of the eyelids, irises, eyelashes, maybe adding the eyebrows, look at the nostril, maybe getting into more of this beard hair, and then adding some of the other, we have the flower crown on there, which I can put in, and it's adding some shadows on there as well. Before that, I know last semester, this is jumping way back, so this might be hard to remember, but we covered a little bit of the rhythms of the head. So thinking about how all, our face is based off of the symmetrical axis, and so it's inherently has rhythms to it. Either it be, the sockets to one another, bottom of the eyelids to one another. Now we can't see this rhythm on this side, but there's this beautiful rhythm that comes from off the top of the ear down that cheekbone and then rolls under the chin. And it's there in me, and what this photo actually enhances through the shadow of this leaf is kind of the under the cheek shadow. So it kind of gives me a little bit of a sunken cheekbone right there, which is nice and enhances it. And so we can push that, just like how we designed this over here and bump this out to create depth there. We can enhance this by giving me more prominent cheekbones. Yay. And then looking at maybe the mandible here, how it ties. We don't know the ears, we can't really see, but we know by the construction that it's somewhere in between the eyebrow and the bottom of the nose, behind the center line of the side plane. We know it connects to the mandible. Kind of comes out of the bottom of the lobe there. And we can design that as well, making it more angular to push the masculinity of it. If that's what we want to do. Or if you want to push the femininity of it, we can round it. I'm going to go more angular. Okay, so there, we've got light, shadow, a little bit of construction lines. Now we can get into some of the details and then we'll apply the shadows. Let's start by adding details to the eyes, just so that we can double check the placement of the corner of the mouth and the node. Remember, on a straight on view, we can correlate it to the center of the pupil. So let's jump in here. I've kept it super simple. A lot of these will actually kind of soften and fall and gradate out because it's the end part of the cast shadow of the eye socket. For now, I lumped it all together, so let's push some deep darks in here. Let's start with the eyebrow, and it kind of follows on the brow ridge. It starts down here in this triangle of darkness, and then comes up on the brow ridge into the outside light. It remains a dark shape just because of my dark local color of my hair. If you're kind of like really light haired, then it might get lost in that light shadow a little bit more. I'm using a softer pencil now instead of the hard one. The hard one goes on lightly, or the willow is easily erasable, so I'm using just a softer pencil now to push these deep darks so I don't have to push harder. It just lays down a darker line. Next, I want to look at the eye fold, or the epicanthic fold. And this is kind of like the drawing exercise, moving from noten into the minor parts of the shadows. We're kind of darkening the core shadow. I mean, it's the eyebrow, but it's where the light can't reach anymore, right, bumped up against the halftones up here. So we're pushing kind of the core shadow there, and then this fold becomes an occlusion shadow in a sense. And by adding those two, we get that reflected light. So I'm not pulling any tone off the canvas, I'm just darkening the core shadow and the occlusion shadow in here. Look at your reference, look at your mirror. Don't just assume that this line continues the same kind of darkness and the same thickness all the way across. It doesn't. I'm looking back at my reference, and when I find the line back over here, it's nice and dark, but we kind of lose it in there. Okay, so that's going to be the trick for capturing the reality of your reference. Is don't always assume, just trust what you have the picture of, or trust what you're seeing in the mirror. Base it off the knowledge of this construction, and then check, observe for what we want to push. We don't want to draw a symbol of an eye, we want to draw what we're observing. Now this was my guess for the tear duct, or the corner of the eye here. That feels right. And it comes up into that top lid. We can actually see in my reference the bottom plane of that top lid. It falls into darkness, into shadow, but there is a little bit of thickness there. It's going to show the thickness of the top lid. More so, it's going to show more so than the bottom lid. We have a thickness of the bottom lid which actually catches a highlight, which we're going to get to right now. Now I'm basing these shapes off of my pupils looking down and out. I might want to flip to my other reference and redirect if I want to change my iris to be over here more and make contact with the viewer. Now might be the right time to do that. Remember, you're rarely gonna see the full circle of the iris. I put it in there just to get the roundness of it. You're rarely gonna see the whole circle because the lids will cover it. And then there is the cornea on top of the iris and the pupil, which has actually some thickness to it, right? Or like from a perfect profile, that's a little bit of a bump. Whoa. So that way, you know, it catches the lid and it's going to change the thickness or the angles of the lid. So instead of the lid kind of turning right here, it gets stretched a little bit here. Another little design feature. So you can see we're basing a lot off of the reference we took and the observation. I'm trying to base the thickness of this iris and pupil, or the shape of it, proportion of it, off of my reference, but then I'm changing a little bit. We're the artists, we have the power to do that. See, so now it's a self-portrait, and I feel like it's just more engaging for the viewer, especially as the artist drawing the self-portrait, you're kind of interacting with the viewer now. If it was a model that I was drawing, I think it would be more appropriate to have it looking down and out, kind of maybe contemplating. But as the artist trying to communicate with the viewer, I think this is going to be more powerful. You see, we don't want this one looking that way too, so I moved this one. And keep in mind just a little bit of perspective as far as scale goes. Smaller. You can base it off of the scale of my reference. Okay, so this moves a little bit. And then there is light catching right here, so that'll become a light shape. And this rolls back into the socket of the eye a little bit, so there's some darkness there. And even though this is the sclera, or the white of the eye, it's rarely ever white, especially in strong light like this, where I'm getting the cast shadow covering the whole socket. All of this is going to get some tone. I don't want to lose the definition of the iris, but I don't want that to be the white of the eye either. So just push this a little bit darker. And in my reference, I can't see the pupil going super dark, so I'm not going to put it in there because I don't see it. Observation. And the bottom lid, the top plane of the bottom lid, is actually lighter than the white of the eye. Remember, think just like the tooth cylinder, we're wrapping this around the volume of the eyeball. It's a sphere in there, and so this lid has to come out and wrap around it. And there's a little bit of tone. Let's push this a little bit further. That's my deep dark, but then this rolls back into shadow as well. So the light's coming, you know, it's hitting right here, and then picking up right here. So all of this is in shadow, and of course on that lid right there. So just with a little bit of knowledge of the anatomy, thinking about, one, the proportions, the depth of the eye socket, and then keeping in mind that there's this thickness to the top lid and the bottom lid. The whites of the eyes are not actually white. That the fold isn't just a line, it has variation. We can get something pretty believable. And I don't actually have a glint of highlight on there, so I'm not going to put it in. If the light you have is more like 3/4 or 45 degrees in front of you, then you might catch a little highlight on there, but I don't, so I'm not going to add it. So that same kind of attention we can add over here. Looking at my reference, it kind of cut up and bent here, but since we shifted the cornea, we're going to have the bend right here. The eye fold, and then the eyelid is catching some light, but this is all falling into shadow. It's diffused light, so I'm going to push the shadow just to create more structure. Going with a little bit softer pencil to push the local darkness of my brow or eyebrow. Still thinking about how it starts down here, comes up, and then wraps around where we can't see to the back here. Pushing the straightness of that, the brow ridge, coming into the frontal bone. And as much as you can, just always trying to relate these two. Just keep them related. Just like these lids caught light, so does just a little bit of light on that top plane of the bottom lid, showing its thickness. And then rolling it into the same shadow right there. And getting rid of that white of the eye. Keeping it lighter relative to the iris and pupil, but not white. And this, you know, we're catching, if we look up here really quick, there's a little bit of kind of a faint light. This leaf, or multiple leaves up here, are casting a shadow down here and kind of over the entirety of my forehead. But this lightens up, and the same thing is kind of happening, catching a little bit of light right through there. But in general, I just bring that because we wanted to extend this tone down. Okay, so big takeaways from the eyes are, think about the eyebrow starting down in below the brow ridge, wrapping up over the top, and then coming out to the outside. Push that as the core shadow, and then look for your occlusion shadow in any, if you have a fold down in here. Think about the thickness of the upper lid. It's going to come out, catch some light. If you see the shadow shape of the bottom part, put that in. It's going to enhance the dimension of it, or the structure of it. Same thing with the bottom lid. It's wrapping around the eye. Look for these angles in here. Don't draw them like footballs. Right? Look for the angles of it catching on the cornea, coming out of the eye socket, wrapping around, and then look for that thickness. On the bottom lid, it's probably going to catch some light. On the top lid, it's going to cast some shadow. In mine, the shadow is connecting up with the pupil and the iris, creating this dark shape. You can see how already more realistic that looks, based off of no reference at all. And then things like the like we get a little bit darker from the eyelashes down here, and a little bit darker as we kind of come to another occlusion shadow in here. Don't push those too hard, especially if you're trying to flatter yourself. I guess a self-portrait is a balance between flattery and accurate observation. So depending what you're going for, you know, I'm trying to be realistic, but also, you know, maybe sharpen my jaw, reduce some of these lines in here. This is your opportunity to design. So it's up to you what you want to do. But if you want to keep it youthful, don't press that line too hard. Indicate, that's kind of the occlusion shadow, and it is the end of this cast shadow down here. And it's important to show that's where the bottom eyelid ends, but I'm not going to overemphasize it. I'm not going to make a sharp line out of it. Okay, so that's the eye. Let's look at the nose. Remember, first, big structures first, top plane, side plane, bottom plane. And now we can look at the minor planes of it. And give out the same thing, pushing, you'll catch a little bit darker, just how we had some core shadows here. Some darker where the light meets the shadow. Especially the ball of the nose. It's just kind of like the eyeball. It's got some nice value and form to it. And come here, clean some of this up. that was a construction line, so I'm going to pull that out. Same with this. And sometimes, depending, so my light was coming from way up here. If your light was more around here, where you might get more detail in the eye, you also might find that these values are pretty much the same. And you might have put this line in here, you'll probably pick it up right here, but you might have put it in here for construction, and then you could probably lose it because these values will be the same. In my case, this value is actually quite a bit darker. But I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to pull this line out and just leave the shape of the value there. Okay, so it brings it forward without outlining it. And then instead of just drawing the nostril, think about, that tone here. Think about the ball of the nose turning into the septum. So see, I'm drawing kind of the bottom of the ball here. I'm not drawing just a hole. I'm thinking how this is curving like this. I'm thinking how it's actually curving this other way because it's the ball of the nose. And then the same thing, instead of curving like this, it's going to pick up the bottom of the wing wrapping under. And then it kind of curves like this. So you get, it's a couple minor forms or volumes creating this absence of a volume. It's not a hole. It's the excess or the leftover of all these different volumes. And there's rarely, I mean, there's a dark shape, but push, just like in our studies from the Vanderpool, we're going to push the edges along here, and then it stops, but it's, see, it's not a line. Kind of dwindles into the shadow there. We're going to do that same thing. So looking for this, looking for the bottom, this, pushing the occlusion shadow in the where the wing meets the side of the face. And this turns into the septum right there. Again, just reinforcing the two-value pattern. And then maybe switching to a softer pencil. Starting on this top edge where it's its darkest, and just kind of fading it out into that light. That way it doesn't look like it's just a hole punched in there. And I can see a little bit, this tone kind of creeps up here. Switch back to my hard pencil and separates the wing of the nose volume from the side and the ball. When I do that, it kind of makes me look at this again, and I think this can come down. And then this line we put in here was actually more, it's going to be a highlight. That's showing that ridge between the maxilla and the nasal bone and the cartilage. And it's going to be a ridge that catches a highlight, not so much a line. So that'll be shown in our light paint, not so much our charcoal or graphite. So I'm going to take it out for now. Go ahead and pull out that center line as well. The great thing about these pen erasers is you can press hard and pull out like some, if you've scratched the charcoal or graphite into the paper, great for doing that, and it's good for accuracy. The bad thing is it leaves all these little pieces of eraser bits behind. So then if you can brush it away, you can blow it away. It's not the best idea because if you get any kind of spit on there, it'll leave a big dark dot. But you can come in with your kneaded eraser and pull it away afterwards. Especially as you get more and more sensitive with these drawings and take them to more and more of a finish. These are great for detail, and these are great for pulling up the little bits they leave behind. Okay. So big takeaway there is move from your big top, side, bottom. Keep that value pattern strong, and then look for the core shadows on the ball of the nose as it rolls underneath. Maybe on the wing of the nose you'll pick up some core shadows as well. And then instead of drawing a circle for the nostril, look at the edges of that lack of volume to create a darkness and blend it in to the shadow you already have. And this edge is just looking a little sharp. Okay. Yeah. Okay, now going down to the lips. Again, this might raise up a little bit. If you raise that up, if it goes too high away from your reference, it's gonna make you look like you're smiling. It might not be the worst thing. A little hard to see in mine because of the facial hair, but remember the nodes of the mouth is where all of those muscles kind of connect and we move around from. A lot of muscles coming in right there. So you're going to have a mass kind of there wrapping around, and it'll be like a bean. So you'll get a nice value shift from it. It might catch light up here and then the deepness of the corner of the mouth, and it rolls out softly. Showing that volume. So if you don't have any facial hair, you're probably going to have to create that. You just don't want to end in a dark line like that. It's going to have some value softening that rolling out of the corner of the mouth. Okay. Mine kind of gets obliterated with the facial hair. The knowledge of that stepped process with the light shadow is going to be important here to push this top lip even darker into shadow so that there's a differentiation between the top lip and the top of the muzzle, because I'm going to put the facial hair on there, so I don't want to lose that structure. And you can see how the facial hair wraps around, giving us that tooth cylinder on this side. Overlap there. Pull out the light on the top lip, light on the top of the bottom lip, which is usually the case if the lighting is coming from above. Press the deepness of the contact point between the top lip. So usually where that center tubercle comes down and divides those bottom two pillows, you'll get a deep dark, and you'll get a deep dark out here too. And this can be all a little bit softer, a little bit lighter. And often, unless you have lipstick on, we tend to think of the lips as being bright red, or if we're not observing carefully enough, that's what we'll paint it, draw it as. Usually they're very similar in value, since we're only working in black and white, to the actual skin tone. So since this is in light and this is kind of turning into halftone, they actually balance out. We're catching a little bit of highlight right here. And pushing, knowing that we've got these two pillars of muscle creating this other concavity down here. And the hair is accenting it as well. Again, it's a little bit lighter over here, where we're again receiving that kind of bounce light or secondary light. That shadow turns into the chin, which catches some light and is a little bit darker because of the facial hair. And then I think just the layering of the hair, since we're seeing through a few strands of it, it darkens up and pushes that line right here. One more just design feature. If you're pushing the masculine type, we want a thicker neck. Feminine type, thinner neck. But again, if you're basing it off observation, stick to what you got. look at, more importantly, look at, we don't want to create a lollipop neck, just like, right, so come, see the connection points. I can't quite see the ear, but we have it kind of constructed here, and it comes out from behind there, not at the actual connection of the jaw. And look where this, follow it through. There. This is a shirt. And just like all the other features, usually, since this is such a big mass, we'll have, and the light's coming from here, there's going to be a cast shadow of some sort. It's kind of softened right here, but just giving some structure and volume. And then this is the front plane, and we saw that there is this cheekbone right here catching light, and there would be some small shadow. That leaf is emphasizing that. Same thing, we have the brow ridge catching the light, and then we have kind of the leaf structure of the head and the hair now back here pushing that value. So a lot of things working in my favor. And with this catching light, and then the leaves are up here, casting shadow. And I'm kind of using the side of the pencil because remember, I didn't like how hard the cast shadow looked from the direct light, so that's why I moved this more diffuse light. So I don't want this to become really sharp edged and take away from the sharpness of these features. So I'm keeping this really soft, diffused shadow shapes. I think it adds interest up there, but I don't want it to pull away from my focal point. Let's pull out this construction line of where the hairline would be. Mine's a little bit higher. Okay, so that's kind of, I've trued up some of the proportions here, thought about the construction, thought about the planes, side plane, front plane, you know, the concavity of the eye sockets here being kind of a plane that cuts in, catching a lot of shadow. All of that's more important than all these little volumes popping out. They have to stay relative. Structure of this nose, and then I kind of thought about a little bit of the anatomy of the glabella, the nasal bone, lateral cartilage, greater alar cartilage. Thinking about the bottom plane of the nose. Get this again, maybe a little bit high right there. Thinking about the structure of the mouth, top plane, bottom plane, top plane, bottom plane. Thinking about the pillows, 3 on top, 2 on bottom. Nodes of the mouth, connection point of the wings, and all in proportions of constructed around the thirds, but then looking how your self-portrait or your model differs. Okay, now if you were to jump into paint, which I'm going to do, and you want to fix this, by fix I mean capture it or keep it so it doesn't blur, because if I go in here with paint, it's just going to pick up this and in effect turning this into a black pigment. And just making a muck of it. So we want to fix it with a spray fixative, or if you're in a bind, you can use like a hairspray. Okay, so I'm going to fix this, and then I'm going to do a reductive painting on top of this.